Good afternoon, it's mid-March and I'm here at the Lyscombe rewilding site, Dorset Wildlife Trust site just north of Dorchester. So I've been helping the Wildlife Trust kind of set out the future for this piece of land, which was acquired last year, and it's basically a large rewilding site. It's about 335 hectares. If I just walk around and talk a bit about smoothness of this arable. So it's undulating, so it's not flat, but it's smooth, and that's just come by the hedgerow. I was hoping I'd be out of the wind here, but not at all. Anyway, yeah, it's very smooth. So a few hundred years worth of ploughing on this chalk arable has arguably smoothed out the kind of the landform. So it's not removed the gentle undulations, but I would argue that it's certainly smoothed the land surface relative to how kind of undulating it might have been at a more micro level. We're talking about micro topography here, so how undulating at that micro level it might have been prior to the arrival of agriculture here and the arrival of the plough more particularly. So the question is, do we do anything to jazz up the landform, to kind of put back some of the wrinkles, so reduce the smoothness and put back some of the wrinkles at a very fine scale? So we could go big. So you've got the kind of the large butterfly banks that organisations like the RSPB have created on some of their kind of chalk rewilding, or not rewilding, chalk grassland creation sites, such as Winterbourne Down, I think, where they've created very tall, several metre tall chalk banks by digging out down into the subsoil. So we could go that large, create one or two very large kind of butterfly banks, but also what we can do here is go much down to a much finer scale and kind of put some wrinkles back in at the micro topographical sort of scale. And what that could achieve is just providing a much more varied sort of template for the subsequent sort of recolonisation of plant communities and invertebrate communities as well in particular. So, you know, one option is bring a bulldozer in here and scrape off the topsoil. I mean, it's very chalky, so it's very free draining, and you haven't got much topsoil here, but scrape that off a bit to and then mound up the resulting kind of topsoil into hillocks, and that's just going to be kind of chalky topsoil. And you can also dig a bit into the bedrock and mound up to create bare chalk sort of hillocks as well. So one thing I'd quite like to do here is we're going to be creating some brash piles towards the centre of these fields, you know, just as basically cutting where we're cutting ash trees for safety reasons along public footpaths, and where we're kind of trimming the hedges along the roadsides and rights of way, that kind of thing. We're generating brash, so twigs and small branches and some logs as well. If we can pile some of those up in the middle of these sorts of fields, and then some of that scraped soil, the topsoil in particular, we could pile onto some of those brash piles with lots of twigs emerging from the soil. What that gives us though is a hillock within brash that could entice the rabbits out of the hedgerows. There's still plenty of rabbits here. Out of the hedgerows towards the middle of these rather large open arable fields, and get them to start worrying, building tunnels within those kind of piled up mounds of topsoil. And that could create the kind of the mosaic of tightly grazed lawns close to the brash piles, and then further out get a bit taller and a bit more tussocky away from the rabbits. That's creating kind of a vegetation and a topographical variability which could be really useful. And in terms of these scrapes I'm suggesting, digging into the chalk a little bit would create really kind of harsh, parched conditions, which would favour some quite specialised wildflowers, the much finer species that are less kind of competitive, whereas the deeper topsoil, what there is of it, favours some of the more aggressive, or not aggressive, some of the more nutrient kind of attuned species, a species that like the topsoil, some of the taller tussocky grasses, whereas the scraped areas would favour the kind of species that can't really compete with those tussock forming, more vigorous grasses, I'll call them. So the scrapes, creating those parched kind of areas would, bare chalk areas would help some of those less rigorous kind of wildflowers, as with the chalky banks. And obviously the invertebrates would respond to that, because some of them are specialised on some of those scarcer or less aggressive wildflowers. Some of them are specialised on the tussock forming grasses and taller wildflowers. So you're just introducing, by at the beginning of a kind of a project like this, whether it be chalk grassland creation, you know, more kind of tried and tested approach to habitat creation, or a rewilding project like this, whether it's one or either of those, when you've got an arable field like this, I think it's always a good idea to, at the beginning, reintroduce micro-topography at a very fine scale, and that's what we're going to be doing here. So tell me what you think about that in the comments section to this video, whether we're missing some opportunities to create different sorts of micro-topography. You know, we're probably going to be looking at dew ponds mainly, or very seasonal pools here. Whether the chalk will hold water for anything more than an hour or two after rain is debatable on this bare chalk. It is very porous. And over the next few years, it's going to be fascinating to see how this site develops and how the wildlife gradually recolonises from the seed bank, which is here in terms of wildflowers. Whether there's much of a seed bank, we'll find out soon. We are going to probably do some inoculation as well. So at Lyscombe, we've got lots and lots of, we've got a superb triple SI chalk grassland site of special scientific interest, which within a site like this, we're really treating as a refuge of species that will then spread back out into the wider kind of arable reversion and species poor grassland areas. So we will probably be doing some brush harvesting, so using a brush harvesting machine mounted on the back of a tractor to collect seed from not the triplet eyes, but from some other areas of relatively species rich grassland we've got on the site which are not designated, and bringing some of those seeds over into the arable fields within the site, and just creating small patches, inoculating small patches. We certainly wouldn't be seeding the whole lot, because the whole idea of these kind of rewilding projects is partly to monitor how they develop and how they perform in terms of species recolonising, species recovery type priorities. So we want to leave a clean slate to some extent without kind of meddling too much, but we do also, I think, want to create some little patches of species richness, just in case the buried seed bank is completely depauperate and doesn't have some species in it that you would expect to recolonise if it wasn't for us depleting the seed bank. So it's interesting times at the moment. So DEFRA, I think last week, we're mid-March 2025, DEFRA last week, bless them, announced they're pausing the Sustainable Finance Initiative payments to farmers, which is really bad news, I think. Really, really poor of DEFRA to do that, because a lot of farmers, including upland farmers who were given a lot less notice of this change, they have been working up their own SFI kind of applications, and SFI pays farmers for doing really good things for wildlife potentially, and just freezing the scheme until, for a year potentially, is really, really bad news. It's a really key kind of agri-environment scheme, and I think DEFRA's definitely got that wrong, and I would like them to reverse that decision. I don't think they're going to, because they're going through a process of cutting budgets for all departments across government. So yeah, that's one piece of news which isn't positive. One piece of news that's very positive that's come out from DEFRA within the last few weeks, I think it was beginning of March, was licensing of the wild release, the official formal release of beavers into the wild in England. Superb news. So we've had, probably for a decade or more now, we've had wild beavers in Devon, and they've gradually been colonising places like Dorset and other parts of Devon and Cornwall. They were unofficial arrivals, so not really sure how they appeared in East Devon initially, but they did. And it's taken a long time for DEFRA, Natural England, to finally be allowed to open up the licensing process. And what that basically means, really good news, is that organisations can now formally apply for a licence to reintroduce beavers into the wild rather than just in enclosures, which is superb. And the National Trust has already done it in Purbeck. So as part of the announcement, the National Trust actually released some wild beavers. They got a licence, they got the first licence in England for wild beaver reintroduction, and they've enacted that licence. They've delivered beavers. Having done a lot of feasibility study work and a lot of consultations, there are now wild beavers in Purbeck, which is brilliant news. Well done, National Trust. God, it's quite a chilly, strong breeze. I'm not sure how sound quality is going to be. I suppose you'll tell me in the comments section. But what a lovely day. Right, I'm going to go back to the car and get a coffee, I think.